Hey, aloha everyone. Michelle Melendez with Blossom Inner Wellness and Stand Together Hawaii.com. I'm here on the big island of Hawaii, and today I'm really excited because I get to interview Leo Lyon Zagami. He's a writer, a researcher, and he's known for his media and music industry career. He was a record producer. And he became popular in 2006 because of his direct involvement in the New World Order and secret societies known to the majority of us as the Illuminati. He's written 12 volumes, Confessions of an Illuminati. He's written Pope Francis, the Last Pope. He's written Invisible Masters, the Puppeteer's Hidden Power. And this man, I saw him on Michael Jaco, and I just knew that I had to interview him. So, Leo, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me on your show. It's a pleasure. I see you have a great background there in the island, and it's of course good to meet also new audience through you. So it's good also that you have already started reading my latest book, Volume 12. So we can definitely go into it.
Yeah, yes, definitely have questions about that. My first question, though, to you is, and first, you guys, I've been studying this for a long time, and when I was researching how the elite bankers took over the United States, turned it into a corporation, and it goes back to the Jesuits, it goes back to the Pope, and this guy, he knows what's going on. And my question to you is, why did you come forward? Because this is supposed to be like, what was your impetus to speak out, to start speaking out about this?
Yes, well, it was almost 20 years ago, and in 2006, I came out of the Monte Carlo Lodge of the Illuminati, which was a very powerful structure within the New World Order, and I started my exposure work. It didn't go unnoticed. In fact, soon after that, I received a visit by the Norwegian Secret Service, and at that point I had to decide between keeping an ordinary life or continuing in this exposure work, which landed me with an accusation for espionage initially in Norway. So that was very much the start of this adventure, though the real start of it is when in 2003 I started to see certain things I didn't like within what you refer to as the Illuminati. And between 2003 and 2006, there was an internal war, which eventually I couldn't really win. So I decided to externalize the whole thing by exposing it. Of course, with the risk for my life. And also, in the end, I was abandoned by my first wife, who took my son because she was pressured, and she was, of course, also offered money and things that I couldn't offer. So then, at that point, I had to move forward with my exposure work on the internet for a few years. I saw that the censorship, though, was increasing, and thanks to what became my new wife, we went to Japan, and then I signed there my first book deal. And so, with my first book deal, I started to publish my revelations, the documents that go with it, because I've always tried to, in the Confessions of an Illuminati, which this is the last installment, volume 12, but it started all the way back when I signed my first book deal in Japan. Then I was offered, like I explained in volume 12, by the Vatican, the possibility of renouncing to publishing this book in any Western language. They will have given me money, they will have given me the Grand Mastership of one of their official orders within the Catholic Church. And I didn't accept that, and I went on with my own plan. I eventually also reawoken my own right of Freemason in 2016 to try to challenge the actual establishment in Italy, but in the end I had to flee Europe in 2019 And then I also had to abandon, formally renounce to my Italian citizenship and my European citizenship, because Italian is part of Europe, of the European Union, which is completely controlled by the Jesuits. And so I had to renounce formally last year after becoming an American citizen. Here, thanks God, I found a great family with the United States of America and with the protection that we have through the First Amendment, especially for us, for journalists and authors who are exposing stuff that is, of course, very delicate. In Europe, this is impossible. You get persecuted, you get persecuted in a way that in the end silences you. So me and my wife in the end decided to flee Europe in 2019 because they were about to take my passport, and that what made it impossible for me to move and to do my job. I saw that the judiciary was very much corrupt. You see, here in America, we have a system whereby defamation, which includes libel, written, and slander spoken, is generally treated as a civil offense. In the Italian Constitution, is a criminal offense because it's a legacy from the fascist time, which they like to keep, so they can silence people with what are usually known as slaps, strategic lawsuits against public participation. And this criminal defamation law used to force the defendants in spending time and resources to defend themselves. And in the end, when you have banned yourself completely economically, you are not able to continue. And for that reason, you see, when I came out with my exposure on the internet in 2006, I had a background in the music business, which you have mentioned. As a record producer, I was the owner of a record label, but I was also a journalist, mainly a music journalist. But I started in the early 2000s to work also for some Masonic publications on the internet. I was part of the Canterbury Masonic Research Center. I had been initiated in 1993, so all the way back to when I was 23 years of age, I started this adventure in the new Illuminati of the New World Order. So the exposure work which I did with these 12 volumes, the project started in my head when I had all these problems between 2005 and 2006. But of course, then putting it together, it takes time. And so, when I got my first book deal in Japan, Japan gave me the possibility to have no censorship and to openly talk about these subjects. And I was very successful in Japan. I actually sold something like 200,000 books in Japan with six different publications. And then later on, I decided to publish in Italy, which was, like I said, after the Vatican had offered me, because they were not, they knew about the publications in Japan, but they didn't really care about, writing in the Japanese language, because that's not really widely available to the Western world. But when I started to publish in Italian, I started to have, of course, some backlash and more backlash until, like I said, I was forced to flee Italy. So my background, my family background brought me into the Illuminati, but later on, between 2003, like I said, and 2006, I understood that I could no longer continue. And so that was what pushed me to start my exposure work in the fall of 2006.
Wow. Thank you so much for that. I want to really have people understand. Well, I want to start with communism because I know that it was communism was started by the Jesuits. Wasn't it started in Paraguay, with
Yes, like I explain in my book, it's actually a vast part of South America that was involved, especially with the Guarani, which were a population which indigenous population, which the Jesuits used to experiment this first form of communism, this theocracy of sorts, which was established, of course, with the support of the Spanish Empire, because the Jesuits are the head of all the secret societies, like I explain in this new book, which is in fact called History, Secret Societies, and the Politics of the Jesuit New World Order and the Luciferian Court, made up of Freemasons, of Illuminati, of think tanks. And when I started my exposure work, I started because, like I said, I was initiated, and I then reached the level of not only of a 33-degree Freemasons, but in all kinds of rites, including emulation and rectified Scottish rite, and many other rites of Freemasonry. In the strict Templar observance, I became the Grand Master. All this basically depends always from the Jesuits, and the Jesuits, in fact, in South America have always had this stronghold for a long time, because they went along with the Spanish and Portuguese Empire, and in some parts of Paraguay, some parts of different, because of course back then, at the start of the 17th century, there was a different division, let's say, of what we now call the various countries of South America. But their intention was to create to discipline, let's say, these natives with what was known as an iron hand in a velvet glove. So it's like at the same time they were carrying on everything, like they were being, these fathers, these Jesuits were Christians and they wanted to bring Christianity, but in reality, they were really using the Guaranis for a sort of well-regulated society that was built on this new precept, this new concept of communism. And so the Guarani Indian Christians became their guinea pigs, let's say, for what were the very early stages of what later on will become known as communism. It was known as the reducciones, the reductions. This was the actual name of this project, and it was later on praised by the future communists, because it was a sort of socialist utopia, Christian communist republic, in which, you see, Jesus, in the eyes of the Jesuits, like I show in the back of my book here with this red flag, which is present in the Mother Church of the Jesuits, is symbolic of this new approach to Christianity, let's say, that the Jesuits wanted to have. And so the kings of Portugal, France, Spain, initially they tolerated the Jesuits, but then after, when they saw that they had this, communism is antithetic to monarchy, so it didn't really work out very well, and that brought them later on to have some trouble with the authorities. So the Jesuits were very much at the beginning born in Spain, and then with of course Ignacio Loyola, but in reality he was persecuted already back then by the Spanish Inquisition, so he had to go in Paris to France, to Paris. And it was in Paris, in Montmartre, in 1534, that him and the original nucleus of the Jesuits, which became the original missionaries of this new order, before they were even sanctioned and approved by the Vatican, created what was known as the Company of Jesus, or the Society of Jesus. And then in 1540, the Pope eventually will accept them. But there was a turbulent time before the acceptance, in which the Jesuits were regarded almost as some, they were connected with the Alumbrados through Ignacio Loyola and the first people who followed them, because the Alumbrados was also perceived as a threat by the Catholic Church. They were the Illuminati of the time. In fact, Alumbrados means actually Illuminati. And was a mix of Gnosticism, Islamic mysticism, Kabbalah, and all this in an Iberic peninsula that, as you know, was being purged by the Inquisition of all these elements because they wanted to have only Catholicism as the religion in both Portugal and Spain. So the Inquisition was in the hands of the Dominicans. And paradoxically, later on, the Jesuits will take over the Inquisitions, which persecuted them. So when they arrived to the areas that are now the borders of the present day Argentina, Brazil, and Paraguay, so these are the areas, let's say, in which there were the Guaranis, this indigenous population, they established these missions. And of course, it ended after the expulsion of the Jesuit order from the Americas, which started in the 1760s, their suppression, and was ratified by the Vatican in 1773. They will only be back into in the Vatican many years later, in 1814. I mean, it was like the
And that right there, 1773, they were eradicated, the Jesuits. We got our independence in 1776. Then they
yeah.
were put back into power in 1814.
But
And
actually, in my book, I explained that even if they were suppressed, they were present in America and were actually very much present at the roots of the foundation of our great country because of the Carroll family, a very influential family that ended up even donating the land where we have built today the Capitol Hill, the great building where we have the seat of power in America of our Congress. So, I mean, it's incredible that even as they were suppressed, they were still so, let's say, influential. Um, and they were influential because the Carroll family gave the first bishop, the first Catholic bishop, which was John Carroll, and then you had his brother Daniel Carroll, who was one of the founding fathers, an influential congressman from Maryland. Then you had also another member of the Carroll family, a cousin who was also Charles Carroll, considered one of the founding fathers of the United States and one of the people who signed the Declaration of Independence. So, I mean, here we are at the very core of the foundation of this great United States of America, which nobody will associate with the Jesuits because formally the Jesuits were out of the picture. Though at the time, the Jesuit general, who was Lorenzo Ricci, was arrested. He was arrested and he was placed in Castel Sant'Angelo, which is this prison where all the enemies of the Vatican were placed traditionally up until the 18th century was very widely used. But the thing is that even if he was in prison, he was still so powerful. And he was still so powerful because even the Pope himself at one point decided to liberate him, but he died on his way out. Apparently, I don't know what happened there. That's quite mysterious. But let's not forget that the Pope before him was apparently poisoned or killed by the Jesuits because he was the Pope who suppressed them. The Pope who suppressed the Jesuits didn't really last that much. I mean, he was immediately eliminated from the scene. So,
very
the,
quickly.
yeah, yeah. I mean, the link that the District of Columbia that bore the name Rome in 1663, and the link that we have historically with Rome because a lot of people tend to associate Washington only with Freemasonry. But in my book, I explain that in the last installment, that's why this is the last installment, which is like a pyramid. You know, you go up the ladder of this system until you arrive to the all-seeing eye. And that's where you have the controllers of the controllers, the controllers of the control.
Who are they? Who are the controllers of the controlled?
The Jesuits, who have had with this figure almost legendary, the Black Pope, as it's known, their head, their superior general. You see, when Ignacio Loyola managed to have his order accepted, he had been already arrested by the Inquisition several times. We said also why he was associated with the Alumbrados, but he offered something new to the Vatican, something that they were in desperate need at the time of great turbulence, which just preceded the Council of Trent, which will be that very important meeting that decided the future of the church. Because, of course, you had Martin Luther, you had, I mean, you had a moment of great difficulty. So,
I
when
want to ask a question about that really quick, just to help people really understand what's going on.
mm,
Martin Luther was a priest, and there was what's called the Protestant Reformation, and he was actually
First of all, Martin Luther was an Augustinian, like the present Pope. He was a Catholic Augustinian friar. I mean, let's not forget that because people just maybe think that Martin Luther just came out of an egg. I don't know. In reality, he was a theologian. He was a professor and an Augustinian friar who went to Rome and after being ordained to the priesthood in 1507 in the Roman Catholic Church, he started an international debate when he authored what is known as the 95 Theses. But he did so because he went to Rome and he saw the decadence of Rome. So at that point in 1520, Pope Leo X demanded that Luther renounce his writing or he would be excommunicated, and he was excommunicated in January 1521. Now, it's quite interesting this because the year after, in 1522, Ignacio Loyola has this vision. He goes into, let's say, a sort of trance in front of the Holy Mary in Montserrat, a beautiful place which I visited myself. In fact, in my books, I always tend to mix elements of biography with also the essay element, because I have my own personal experiences to add in support of what I'm stating. But at the same time, I'm very careful not to speculate. So I have hundreds of footnotes and citations from credible sources that are reported at the end of the book, so people can see that I'm not debunkable by the usual means. If I was a speculator, I will probably have maybe more success with a lot of fantasists on the internet who seem to like conspiracies that are at times completely outrageous. But it's also true that if you stick to the truth, you might find things that are even more
yeah.
incredible than the truth. So you don't really need now to
Ask you about Ignatius, because yes, and you're right about that, because this truth is absolutely insane. Ignatius Loyola, you guys, was this priest, and he was kind of, in my opinion, when I read.
First of all, Ignacio Loyola was a military. Ignacio Loyola was born into a noble family. Ignatius Loyola might have also had
He was the
some
founder of the
good.
Jesuits. This guy, he was the founder of the Jesuits, and he was
Yes. First
kind
of
of,
all, he was a Basque. A Basque. A Basque Spaniard is not a traditional Spaniard because the Basque region is fiercely independent to this day, and they have a different DNA. They are a southern Western European ethnic group, which is characterized by their own language, the Basque language. So they are, yes, in Spain, but in a different category altogether. Now, Ignatius or Loyola was born with another name. He was born Inigo Lopez de Onas y Loyola, which basically then became Ignatius of Loyola because he liked also Ignatius, the name connected to one of the founding fathers of the Christian Church, of Christianity. But in reality, him and his six companions arrived there after he had already put together a path, let's say, a path that started in 1522. And like I said, it's quite incredible, no? Because Martin Luther is something that characterizes the Reformation, while instead Ignazio of Loyola characterizes the Counter-Reformation. So these two figures, in reality, are at the opposing, you know, and so today.
That just a little bit so people get it. So what he's saying, you guys, is he's saying that Martin Luther was the starter of the Reformation, Protestant Reformation, to pull people kind of away from the Catholic Church, and then Ignatius Loyola, he was the founder of the Jesuits, and he was actually wanting to go more toward the Catholic Church, and the Pope was like, you do anything the Pope says under pain of.
Let's say this, that without the Jesuits and without the approval of his order in 1540, there will have probably not been the Council of Trent in 1545, which really gave birth to the Catholic revival. You have to understand this church was in great crisis. This church was filled up by heresies, by even the Pope not being that much of a Christian and more of a pagan hermeticist. We had all this knowledge that was finally coming back after, after there was a dark period after the fall of the Roman Empire. Through the Iberic Peninsula, you had all the basis of what later on what will trigger the Renaissance, because that knowledge will, like Hermeticism, trigger the Renaissance. So the fact that he goes to the Pope, that is in a castle out of Rome, I know very well because I grew up there. And in fact, I actually reawakened my own order in 2016 in this castle in Tivoli, which is near Villa d'Este. Tivoli is a beautiful place. It's literally half an hour from Rome, but it is on a hill, and it's very ancient city. As very, very ancient, and has Villa d'Este, which is the fountains, the fantastic fountains. The Villa d'Este is a beautiful fountain, Villa Adriana, and these are places that were so beautiful because, of course, there was the families of the d'Este family, was very important in the Vatican. Together, then, of course, you had the Borgia at the time, which everybody knows about, very decadent. And because of the decadence of the Borgia, a lot of people couldn't take seriously this church any longer. So, I mean, the thing is, when Ignazio Loyola arrives there, he offers a new concept. The concept was, aside from the three vows that traditionally a Catholic order, religious order takes, which means poverty, obedience, and chastity, then you will have an additional vow, which will be of complete obedience to the Pope. The Pope at that point had a new order to base its counter-reformation, because after the fall, after the persecution and the elimination of the Knights Templars, there was a vacuum in the Catholic Church. There was an absence of something more military. Now, the Jesuits were not as the Templars going around with a sword and being soldiers, warrior monks. They were more subtle, but they were definitely military in nature. That's why the head is known as the general. And in the Counter-Reformation, we have, of course, the fact that the Jesuits infiltrated many times and tried to eliminate, for example, Elizabeth I, because the Church of England was also deemed as a threat, one of the biggest threats. And that's what in the 1560s led to the foundation, as I explain in my book, of the entity, the Holy Alliance, the Secret Service, the intelligence of the Vatican, which still carries on to this day, which has one of their biggest archives in Spain.
And I want to tell people too that the Jesuits had in the past, they were kind of advisors to a lot of the monarchs. And they actually got in, and that's actually why they got booted out, is because they would do stuff like this. They tried to like assassinate kings and do stuff like this, and they found this out. And that's why is that why that they started to get booted out of places?
You see, the mission of the Knights Templars was banking. The mission of the Jesuits was education. Education of the elite. Education of the elite meant also educating the royal houses, especially, of course, the Catholic royal houses, because then, you know, when you had the Council of Trent and then it ended with the political conclusion, let's say, of it all, with the European Wars of Religion in 1648, you had at that point, let's say, a settlement in which you knew that certain monarchs, of course, were not apologetic about, you know, this rebellion, and it started a process that carries on to this day. I mean, to this day, we have a number of denominations in Christianity that would have probably never existed if the Vatican wasn't a bunch of, sorry if I say so, but a bunch of idiotic, incompetent assholes, but also very much decadent in their approach. Because you see, at the end, what are the Jesuits if not really the people who are carrying on the power of ancient Rome, just as the Vatican itself? The power of ancient Rome is a power that had of course, has influenced the whole world, but at the same time suffered, of course, their own decadence. That's why the Roman Empire collapsed with the emperors who were pedophiles, who were dedicated to all kinds of debauchery, while the barbarians arrived and they literally, and sorry if I say, they kicked their asses, if you want to say in a modern term. So at that point, the Jesuits are a continuation of that ancient pagan power that had Rome as its seat. And what does it mean? It means that when, and we are celebrating this year the Council of Nicaea. Council of Nicaea was the moment in which they kind of brought, the Council of Nicaea is the first ecumenical council, and it was in 325 AD. That's why this year we are celebrating, and it's actually going to be used as an excuse by the Pope, the new Pope, who is an Augustinian like Martin Luther, who was given by the Jesuits a mission, which is to bring back the flock that Martin Luther, one of their own, has lost. Remember that maybe 500 years have gone by, but the Vatican doesn't forget. And if you have done something, even if you are a religious order that works for them for centuries, you will have to pay. And this Pope is basically paying for Martin Luther. He will have to bring back the flock that is lost. And that's why the council, and at the same time, we have, of course, the almost 1,000 years separation between the churches of the East, the Orthodox Church, no, the birth of the Orthodox schism, which is itself now a priority for the present Pope. But the gathering of Christian bishops that was convened by Emperor Constantine in 325 was there to address any controversy, meaning the nature of Jesus. Jesus had to become, of course, a god of the gods, the ultimate god. He was the Son of God, but he had to also integrate all the past gods of Romanity, of the Roman Empire. So you see, where we're going to put all these gods? So the Holy Mary became quickly the reflection of Isis. And then the Mitraic cult was absorbed, as well as every single pagan cult, in the many saints of the Catholic Church. Now,
Tell
Martin.
everybody he's saying, what, just to be a little clear, he's saying all these other religions were put into the Catholic Church, these
Yeah,
pagan.
that's why Catholic really, in a way, I mean, the council condemned Arianism, which held that Jesus was a created, a normal being, and affirmed that Jesus was of one substance with the Father. I mean, there were all these theological differences, at times minor. There was Gnosticism that had to be eradicated completely, but was never eradicated because that's why you had then the Alumbrados, you had the Gnostics that was still striving at the time of Ignacio Loyola, because certain things you can maybe eliminate formally, but not in reality, because they always tend to survive, no? But pagan cults couldn't be just eradicated in one day from ancient Rome. I mean, you were like going against cults that had been there for hundreds of years in each other. So what are you going to offer them? You're going to offer them a new position within a universal church. So Catholicism is universal, is
Yes.
something that is not only, that's why people tend to have a bit of confusion, no? Because Catholic means universal, means all inclusive. It's not only Christianity, is
Yes.
Christian Catholic.
Yes.
And so today, you know, the Catholic Church believe it's the true church in the sense that it's the visible and unified communion that teaches the same doctrine as the apostles in every place. But in reality, they are integrating a lot of other elements. So I don't know how happy Jesus will be of the integration because Jesus, after all, was born a Jew, monotheist, and was very much a believer in one God. Of course, then we have the interpretation of the Trinity, in which Jesus is part, but the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. But having said that, the first use of the term Catholic Church, literally meaning universal church, was made by Ignatius of Antioch. Ignatius of Antioch is the very guy which I explain in this book, inspires the name Ignazio Loyola.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So we go all back to, and then, of course, Ignatius of Antioch is also the guy who artificially created that legacy whereby from Peter you go all the way down the episcopal lineage to the present pope. Now, since last year, as I explain in my book, there is a ticking time bomb which this pope wants to use to depose the papacy, the supremacy of the papacy, because at the moment after 2000 years, the Vatican doesn't need anymore a pope because he needs a bishop amongst bishops to bring in a synodal approach everybody together and back the flock back to it's of course an artificial way of doing things that is trying to trigger basically the belief that I mean we all know that at the beginning the church was not like we know it today. It was very much a small community of many communities in which there were bishops here and there, and there wasn't Peter saying, I am the supreme Pontifex Maximus. Pontifex Maximus is a Roman term from antiquity. It doesn't have anything to do with the Catholic Church, with the, not with the, it has to do with the Catholic Church, but it doesn't have to do with Christianity. I mean, Jesus didn't go on the cross calling himself Pontifex Maximus, but they have built around Peter an
Yeah.
artificial construct that then carries on this legacy. So the Ignatius of Antioch is the historian that the church fathers look to, and he himself is considered as such, to say we have a history here, that from Peter on we have a papacy. And nowadays, last year, in June of last year, the Pope and the Jesuits instead published in a way that wasn't very promoted. You know, they didn't go worldwide and say, we are promoting the fact that for 2000 years we lied. I mean, it would be a little bit. But instead, if you go and read what they say, they basically saying that it was an artificial construct and that there was no such thing as the papacy.
Wow. Oh my gosh, that's incredible. So, the reason why I wanted to interview is because I want people to understand who is the one that's really running this country, and that communism and fascism, that they're in the United States, and it's coming from the Jesuits, all going back to the Jesuits and the Pope. But you just floored me right there.
Well, I
The
mean, you see, let's go back to Washington. Let's go back to Capitol Hill. Let's go back to the symbols that are expressed there. I explained how the Vatican actively collaborated with sending even one of their own artists to depict the apotheosis of George Washington, like he did. It was one of the main painters and artists of the Vatican who did that. It was a Jesuit agent who came from Rome and did that. So people need to understand the Pontifex Maximus was the chief high priest of ancient Rome's state religion. And the moment in which the state religion became Christianity, it was adopted altogether and sanctioned and ratified by the empire because the Pope at that point became a imperial figure. So the Jesuits arrived in a moment in which that imperial figure was in decline. So they had to, in which the Reformation was bringing the truth about Christianity to light. We had later on also the King James Bible, to which, by the way, a lot of people say, "Oh, Leo, you are Catholic. What about the King James Bible?" And well, guys, just go and read the history. The mentor of King James was a young family member from my own family, my ancestor. So, I mean, maybe you should study history before you open your mouth. But in any case, I demonstrate in this book that my long family history kind of brought me to act this way because of our long legacy also with the Jesuits. In fact, at the end of this book, I show that one of the teachers of Pope Francis was a member of my family, Carlos Aldunate Lyon from Chile. My grandfather was born in Chile. My family was also in Chile, aside from England, because there is this tradition that the Lyon family has in South America. And not only him, there is also another important member of the Jesuits, his brother, who was the head of the province of Chile, another very important Jesuit here, and also a Lyon family member who is José Aldunate Lyon. The family where the home of my family in Chile is nowadays a convent.
Oh, wow.
Just and you have the image of my great grandfather on a horse in the convent. My mother went to visit it back in 2001, and she said, "There's a guy who looks exactly like you, and he was your great grand, and he's in a convent, and all the nuns are there praying." I was like, but people need to understand that the fact that I carried on this tradition, the Scottish part of my family, the Lyon family, which became the family of the Queen Mother, was a family of Jacobites. It was a family of Catholic supporters, which is, of course, held in high regards in a situation in which for a few hundred years there was a war with the Church of England, fought also within the United Kingdom. No? So I think that today is very different. Now, today we have King Charles who is like this with the Pope. He went to visit Pope Francis, he wants to visit. It's a completely different scenario because nowadays they're unifying everything back together. They're putting all the pieces back together. And that is only the first stage for the one world religion that is going to eventually be put together, which will not only include Christians, but it will include Jews, Muslims, and so on. And the encyclica Fratelli Tutti, Pope Francis in 2000, that was brought together right in the middle of the pandemic, I think it was 2020, it was the encyclica of a Jesuit who was using Jesuit elements mixed with Masonic elements in this putpurri, in this putting together this one world religion. Because in volume 7 of my Confessions, I actually explain how Freemasonry and the Jesuits have worked hand in hand to create this one world religion. And I've already explained this volume 6.66, which is a very important part of my confession series, that this project started in early 2019. Project that started in Abu Dhabi, involved the Sunnis. Later on, I think it was 2021, the Pope went even to Iraq to involve the Shia. Then there was involvement of the Buddhist. I mean, this is a worldwide religion, a one world concept, a one world religion, and a one world government that will eventually emanate from it all. Uh,
There, because I just have to have hope that we can get our freedom back, but we haven't had true freedom in this country for a very, very long time. And what's coming now with all the fires that are happening in Canada and the United States, and what's going to be coming from that, which comes through the planning departments, is basically the Agenda 21 through the United Nations, which is all, I mean, those are all
Well, the agenda, I will call it more the Agenda 2030 at this point, because 2021 is already behind us. I think we are going towards what the Pope himself, Pope Francis, the former Pope, presented at the United Nations, because the Agenda 2030 is the agenda for so-called sustainable development, which outlines these sustainable development goals, which I explain very much in my book. They were the idea of Padre Pedro Arrupe, one of the Jesuit generals after the Second Vatican Council, that gave birth to the concept also of the eco-Jesuit. So, people might think that the Jesuits are simply a group, a religious order, but in reality, they are at the core of the intelligentsia of the elite. I mean, without them, we will not have Georgetown, Fordham, we will not have the most influential educational institutions in this country. In California, and this is not my words, but the words of a former professor who has been here for many years, who I sometimes work with, do some great shows, Professor Yamamoto, he has actually said himself, that every single university, even the ones that are supposed to be state universities here in California, are under the control of the Jesuits.
So yes, yes, everything is infiltrated, you guys, and it's been infiltrated for a very long time. I do want to do a screen share because I want to show you one thing about the oath of the Jesuits.
Ah, okay.
That's very disturbing, but I think it's really important for people to see. This is the extreme Jesuit oath, and you please tell me about this. Let me move this a little bit out of the way so I can read this. But it says, I further promise to declare that I will, when opportunity present, make and wage. Sorry, guys, I gotta bring this down a little bit. Oops. All right, hold on a second. I have too many windows open, but let's go back. All right, all right, it's not there. It goes. Wage relentless war, secretly or openly, against all heretics, Protestants, and liberals, as I am dedicated to do, to extirpate and exterminate them from the face of the whole earth, and that I will spare neither age, sex, or condition, and that I will hang, waste, boil, flay. I mean, this is horrible.
Now, we have to be very careful here because, of course, some of the material that filtered since the very beginning, the Jesuits have been, of course, criticized. They have been criticized with public, I mean, aside from the last 25 years in which there was no publication to expose the Jesuits. In fact, I said the last publication was by my old friend Eric John Phelps in the year 2000. Before that, there was a book in 1999, Susi, Rulers of Evil, and before that, only Jesuits by a former Jesuit who was Father Malachi Martin. But in reality, when the Jesuits were created, it was probably after 11 years, I think in 1551, that an Augustinian friar went on the pulpit and started to criticize them. And that was only the beginning. And then you had other publications. Now, Some of these publications that includes alleged oaths, we have to be very careful because some of them might also have been instigated by a Protestant mindset that wanted to build up an even more anti-Jesuit rhetoric. However, in my book, I explain very much how let's say that a lot of publications were actually containing truth because we had, for example, very first one was the Monita Segreta. And so some of the material that you might have might be from that, some of it might be from other publications. The Monitor Secreta was this Secret Instructions of the Jesuits and the Secret Instructions of the Society of Jesus. It was published in Krakow in 1615, and it was allegedly written by a former Jesuit who was Jerome Zarowski. And then after that, you had another publication also that seemed to have created a stir at the time, and it was Monarchia Solis Forum, which was also by another Jesuit, not a former Jesuit, but actually a Jesuit. Now there is some confusion because apparently the author himself managed to blame another Jesuit because he was too powerful and too influential as he came from a family of the black aristocracy. So he was untouchable. And so they had to blame another Jesuit. But like I said, from that moment onwards, a lot of publications started. However, we have to always be very honest about things.
Was
There
that was
was
is that oath in of any form of it? Is that what a
Absolutely.
Jesuit?
I mean, there is some parts of the oaths that are clearly and honestly put there because they were at the time carried in that way. I don't think that today they might do the same thing because their objective is completely different. As they have already won their counter-reformation, they don't need to take the same kind of, I mean, that oath might have had a purpose 400 years ago, 450 years ago. It might not have the same purpose today. It will not have the same, you understand? You have pointed out on a part of an oath in which you say this and that about the Protestants. Today, and I can tell you this from a personal experience, I was in a Masonic lodge not so long, in 2018, I was invited in London, and this lodge was carried by a Rite of Memphis and Mizraim, a French rite in London, with members of the United Lodge of England in a mixed lodge, men and women, and they invited me there. I went, and it was in a church. It was a church of Anglican church. It was a church of St. Edmunds in the heart of the city in London. I remember when they were, because they were, of course, renting the space, and then, of course, they would give it back to whoever, to the church to carry on their functions. I went and I saw on the side every Wednesday Ignazio Loyola's spiritual exercise here with the Anglican Church, and I was like,
That
oh.
crazy Jesuit, you guys, that founded the Jesuits. I mean, this guy was
No,
over.
no, but the crazy thing is that, yeah, Ignazio Loyola created those spiritual exercises
Yeah,
after 1522, and they became the basis of the egregore of the exercises that carry on this order, but also the people who they bring in their fold, let's say the powerful people that they train. And so, but it was unimaginable if we went back 400 years at the time, or 450 years at the time of Elizabeth I, it would be unimaginable that a Church of England will have a weekly meeting dedicated to the exercises of their number one enemy, the Jesuits and the Nazis. It will have been completely. So you see, things have changed
yeah.
completely. Now
Let
the
me,
Jesuits have actually the King Charles, the King Charles who goes to Rome. It's number one in the World Economic Forum Great Reset Project, which itself, like I explained in Volume 7 of my Confessions, was born out of the Pact of the Catacombs in the Vatican, made in December 1965. So things have completely changed. And that's why when you read this these oaths, you have to take them for historically where in that time they were written, and it's a completely different time.
So they're not taking that kind of oath anymore.
Let's say that the oath they take today is still of absolute obedience. They will do any kind of mission for the Pope. This absolute submission. You can go into the actual oaths that are the official versions that are published. You can still see the absolute, because they have to lay down and in complete submission to the Pope. And that means that the Pope can order them things that are antithetic even to the Christian faith. The Jesuits will dress up as ordinary people. They will not necessarily dress up as priests. They will go and dress up as the local people if they became like the mission of the Jesuits brought them to the Far East. Ignacio Loyola was a visionary in this sense. He wanted to absorb knowledge and power in distant lands, so he sent one of his closest allies immediately to China. Matteo Ricci has a shrine today in Beijing and is regarded as he became assistant to the emperor back then. The Jesuits from that time onwards had carried the very important positions in the Chinese empire. In Goa, where they had their base for Asia, they had converted the Kshatriya, who were the aristocratic class of the Hindus. They didn't go and convert some, the poor people to the gospel. They wanted to convert the elite to their own gospel, because the spiritual exercises, which I explain in my book, I don't know if you went through that part of my book, but it's very important because I explain the dangers of these spiritual exercises. They are not simply spiritual exercises, they're exercises in which they transmit the person a capacity and make him believe that he's actually doing the will of God in that moment. Even when we can say it's almost like they are spiritual alchemists more than Christians. They are channeling what? They're channeling this egregor which they have built up from that moment onwards. And I mean, the spiritual work of Ignacio Loyola is still carried on to this day by the Jesuits with absolute reverence. And it's and not only by the Jesuits, but also by the politicians who work for the Jesuits, the businessmen who work for the Jesuits, who at least once a year have to do a 2 weeks retirement into some kind of monastery in which they have to recite these things that are, I guess, the spiritual exercise is like it focuses the brain on certain things, but at the same time, it's of course a way of brainwashing the people who are their own, their own foot soldiers in the ordinary society. I mean, when in August 1522, and this is very interesting that all these things in the most important things for the Jesuits always happen in the month of August. It happens in the month of August that 1522, when Saint Ignazio claimed he received the great vision, who indicated him the invisible powers who will bring him to write the spiritual exercises. It was August of 1534, with him and his 6 disciples were in Montmartre, climb up the hill and declare absolute obedience, and created, basically sanctioned the beginning of the Jesuits. So I think that people need to understand that the Jesuits in reality worship Isis. And so August the 15th represents the solemnity of the Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary. It's a holy day in the Catholic Church, of course. In Italy, it's like called Ferragosto, and nothing is open. It's like even Christmas is not like Ferragosto in Italy. There's nothing you can. I mean, it's like I don't know. Nowadays, maybe things are starting to change. But when I grow up, everybody knows that Ferragosto is like you can go through Rome, it's like a ghost town. It's nobody. Everybody leaves the city, all the things, everything is closed. And that,
What is that? What is that celebration again?
the solemnity of the Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary, who is, it's this Assumption is basically the feast of the Assumption to celebrate the departure of Mary from this life. By her natural death, she goes directly into heaven. She kind of, huh? But for the Jesuits, the 15th of August, 1534 was the moment in which they sanctioned the beginning of their activities. And that moment was the moment in which they decided they had to go to Rome. They went to Rome. They started to go to Rome in the second half of the 1530s to try to get the Pope to accept their order. It didn't happen in one day because they were not priests yet. When in 1534, Loyola, a former soldier who had been fighting in battle and who had been injured, and that's why he eventually ended up in 1522 with this experience, who brought him on a religious path, but he wasn't yet a priest. That's why also the Inquisition was arresting him again and again, because he was doing things that were deemed to be exclusive of of a priest. So he goes to Rome, not yet accepted as a priest, but eventually the Pope says, okay, in Venice you can become priest. It's quite indicative, though, if you think about it, in Venice, out of all places, because Venice is not simply a little town. Venice of 500 years ago was like, I don't know, like New York of today. It was a center of power. It was a very important merchant city that connected the east and the west, because from Venice you will go directly to Istanbul. You will go down and you will go down to, and plus, of course, the black aristocracy of Venice was very powerful. If I think that Venice is also very well known, also because of Giordano Bruno. I don't know if you know a little bit the history of Giordano Bruno, who ended up being arrested, persecuted, and eventually brought on the stake. But Giordano Bruno was a victim of the Inquisition because he simply didn't want to bow down to the papacy, and he also worked as a secret agent for the enemy, for Elizabeth I, and for the English. But he was a Dominican, so he had betrayed the Vatican by doing that. No, now he was eventually in the year 1600 in this burnt on the stake in Campo dei Fiori. There is nowadays a statue there. But he was an alchemist, an astrologer. Let's not forget that a guy who believed in many worlds and the possibility of alien back then already. So he was his cosmological theories were pretty dangerous. They were deemed dangerous. The Inquisition found him guilty and burned him at the stake because of all that. He believed in the Copernican heliocentrism. I mean,
I have a question I want to ask you from your
hmm,
book. This was from your book. It says 1312, King Philip
yeah.
IV said the Knights Templar had rituals, had sexual rituals and worship of Baphomet. Is that happening today through the Jesuits? I know that they have some rituals. I know that there's human trafficking happening. What is going on with their
Okay,
rituals?
I would say that I made very clear that the Baphomet figure, especially with volume 10 of my Confessions, which is dedicated to Islam and the secret societies connected to Islam, Islamic Freemasonry. In reality, Baphomet, it was for the Knights Templar also Mohammed, though it wasn't Mohammed in the way traditional Muslims will interpret it, but it was actually a schismatic version of Islam which inspired them, and it was this Mohammed on the cross that for the Muslims would be a complete heresy. And at the same time, the interpretation of this Baphomet led to many misunderstandings, and eventually then it was reacquired by Eliphas Levi and depicted in this goat of Mendes symbol that then inspired Aleister Crowley. So Baphomet became also something that from the Templars legacy transcended that legacy. Anyway, the rituals of the Knights Templars are very different from the ones of the Jesuits.
What are
The,
the ones of the Jesuits today? Like what's happening
the
today?
Jesuits picked up from the Knights Templars the cult of Mary, which was connected to the cult of Isis and was connected to Gnosticism in reality, because that also is part of it. But the cult of Isis was very important in ancient times, okay? They built their astronomical sector, the first astronomical center, the first university in Rome, on the ruins of the biggest temple of Isis in ancient Rome. Um, so the Jesuits have this fixation. One of the professors then of the Collegio Romano became known for becoming the first guy to interpret the Egyptian hieroglyphs even before the Rosetta Stones. But those cults, of course, are conducted with practices that have nothing to do with Christianity, and at times they could be connected with sexual deviance and so on. Now, the actual Jesuits, though, have been expert of the esoteric, of the occult, of these powers since they were created, because that's why it was another reason why the Pope accepted Ignatius Loyola offer, because he knew that they were experts of the occult. And in that moment in which they wanted to do the Counter-Reformation, it would have been great to also hunt down the witches and warlocks and stuff, or even accuse people who were innocent of doing the very same things that the Jesuits were actually doing behind closed doors. I mean, Ignacio Loyola was known for having hypnotized young girls and having done sexual practices with them. So he wasn't really a saint of sorts, even if later on he would become a saint. But that is these practices, these forbidden practices, the deviance of the Jesuits has a whole chapter in my book, because, of course, they at the time often they indulged in activities that were contrary to their vow of chastity.
Well,
And often this happened because the fourth vow superseded the chastity vow, meaning this: if the mission required, they could even marry or practice, or do sex or other things, as long as they respected the fourth vow.
which was what?
Submission to the Pope, complete. So the Pope orders you to do this, go into a foreign nation, establish a family, act like you are a normal citizen and not a priest, and all that. When you go back to Rome, if you did it because of the fourth vow, as I explained with the testimony from a Jesuit in this book, the Black Pope will say, "You are still a Jesuit, don't worry. You have a son, you have a daughter, we don't care." So it always supersedes. So it depends from, and in regards to the pedophile, unfortunately, that is something that is connected with the darkest realms. Meaning that there has always been pedophile sex operating within the Vatican, and the Jesuits themselves became more inclined, especially since in the last 100 years, especially in the 1960s, the seminaries let in a lot of homosexuals and pedophiles. Because of the Second Vatican Council, there was a change into making the church even more progressive, and they they went against a lot of the restrictions that happened before. So probably if we look back at the Jesuits of 2 or 3 centuries ago, we will have Jesuits that would have preferred to rape a woman than a little boy. It's not that it's any better, eh? I'm not saying it's any better, but it will have been a different. So
Right.
you will have accusations, like I report in my book, of Jesuits doing those kind of things, of raping, of having relations which were improper, uh,
So,
but but
uh,
often they will come out of these accusations completely innocent, while instead the girl that was the victim might instead be accused and be even arrested as a witch or whatnot. So that is the problem here, in finding also. I mean, the history of the Jesuits is quite incredible in this regards.
yeah, I mean, this goes back. This is why I said that these people that pretty much run the country have been in charge of things for thousands of years. And so, what
Yeah,
do you?
I mean, you see, in ancient Rome, let's go back to ancient Rome because we said that the Jesuits carry on the legacy of ancient Rome. Why did Rome end up as an empire? Because at the end, the last 200 years of the empire, Rome was a party town in which there was only debauchery, little children, pedophile rings left, right, and center, incest, all kinds of things. The more it was perverted, the more the ancient Romans liked it. And that's why, in the end, the empire inevitably declined.
Well, that's what's happening with the United States, though. I mean, I'm looking at all of the movies and everything that's happening. Our child sexual.
History repeats. Yeah, no, you're right. You're right. History
That,
tends to repeat.
so, do you think are the Jesuits behind the human trafficking that's happening in the United States? Because it's messed.
Absolutely. I explain this in my book because of the immigration policies of the Jesuits, because of their connections with the NGOs in South and Central America, pushing all these millions of immigrants, especially thanks to the second Catholic president in history, which was Joe Biden, which was a complete puppet in their hands. They pushed because they want to change the political landscape and religious landscape of the United States by flooding this country with millions of South and Central Americans who are all brainwashed Jesuits because the Catholics, I'm sorry to say that, because I have, my grandfather was born in Chile, but I mean, I have to say that South and Central America are Jesuit strongholds still to this day, just like we talked about the reducciones. Now, they might not be at that level of control in which the Jesuits were controlling, like in a sort of dystopian way, how they came together even in bed, because that's what happened in the reducciones. But to this day, if I bring millions of people from South and Central America, I will bring millions of brainwashed Catholic people who, as soon as they see a Jesuit, they will be like, ah. Who do you think controls the cartels in Mexico?
Yeah,
The
yeah.
cardinals take millions of dollars from the cartels.
Mhm.
And, so who lets them in? The Catholic NGO and the cartels. That's it. I mean, it's pretty obvious. So I mean,
So, what do you think is going to be coming for the United States and be happening here? Because they have let in millions of immigrants here now, and I know that they're trying to get deported, but it's such a mess. It's like,
mm,
what do you see that's coming for the United States?
well, the Jesuits have a great alliance with the Sabbatean Frankists, the heretics of Judaism, the left wing of Judaism, the labor Zionists, let's call them. And so they control Hollywood and the propaganda together with the Jesuits in this country, have brainwashed left, right, and center everybody. They still control the mainstream narrative. And of course, now they have a pope who has an experience in South America and Peru himself because he was a bishop of Chiclayo. So, I mean, we're talking about the fact that a lot of people now say, oh, but Pope Leo XIV is rather conservative in his approach. He's actually recognizing a woman and a man as a family. Oh, wow. Oh, wow. What a revolution. They were losing a grip even on their own Catholics in South and Central America because of their woke BS. So they had to do something about it. But in any case, I think that the problem here, I mean, my friend Tom Oman, a great guy who is, of course, in charge of the situation when it comes to migration, he's doing a job which is almost impossible to implement 100%. So we have to hope that this struggle is not going to end up with another Democrat in the White House because that will be the end. I mean, they already demonstrated in the last term how many they can let in. Imagine if they reopen the borders, there will be a queue from here to Argentina. And so I hope that we can avoid that. I hope that the Republicans can focus more than the tariffs, focus on this migration matter, which is sort of a priority, the sovereignty of the nation. Then, of course, the tariffs are important to bring back the jobs in this country, especially due to the fact that we are fighting with China on an existential threat like artificial intelligence, which is cyber Satan. As you know, I touched this topic in the last chapter of this book, but I also touched it in a trilogy, which is volume 6.66, volume 7, volume 9 of my Confessions. And that is really the 2030 turning point, aside from the sustainable agenda we mentioned earlier.
So my question is this though, because I know the Jesuits have basically infiltrated this country for a very long time, and we have a second constitution. I believe it was 1786, I think it was put in. But wouldn't they also control the Republican side as well?
They, of course, tried to control what we used to call the Republican Party. And now it's the Republican in name only because now the Republican Party has a new DNA. Of course, like I described in my book, they even attempted to recruit in Fordham Donald J. Trump through their secret societies that are present on campus. But the thing is that at the moment, Trump and the new Republican Party, because we have to be honest, the MAGA Republican Party has nothing to do with what used to be at the time of Bush. Like Nixon or Reagan were still very much Jesuit products in one way or another. We can say that maybe Reagan was a little bit less, but still, his background was pretty much here in California, I mean, which is a Jesuit stronghold. Nixon, I mean, so these were people who were hanging out at the Bohemian Grove, at the Bohemian Club, which itself today, who is one of the biggest high priests and powerful people in the Bohemian Grove, is the husband of Nancy Pelosi, who is himself a Jesuit agent because they both met on Georgetown campus and they are both considered fifth-class Jesuit agents. So I think that today we have to hope that Trump's reformulation of the Republican Party has distanced itself from the Jesuits, and it has demonstrated that because every single policy that Trump has embraced is at the opposite of what the Jesuits are pushing. You just have to go on America, the Jesuit Review, which is the official publication of the Jesuits here in America, whose editor at large, main editor is Father James Martin, who is the supervisor of the present Pope in matters of communication. And he's the founder of Outreach, the LGBTQ mission for the Catholic Church. They have pushed a transgender free space in the university in San Francisco. I mean, every single thing we see at the moment Trump fighting is pushed by the Jesuits. There is not a policy that Trump is opposing at the moment, or even a country, because China is a Jesuit stronghold. So
Yeah. So the reason why I started with communism at the beginning of
will he manage to win this war? No, I mean, it's not easy. It's absolutely not easy. It only needs an act of betrayal by somebody like maybe J.D. Vance, who is a new Catholic who still doesn't understand all the nuances of the Catholic Church, who has demonstrated at time he doesn't really understand and grasp completely, though he has in the past criticized, and that gave me a good feeling when he cited Ordo Amoris, when he talked to the Pope about interpreting things in a different way, but in a more traditional way. But the thing is that all these traditional Catholics today who love the Latin Mass, who have a more traditional Catholic approach, they are a minority. Yes, it's true that Pope Leo XIV is trying somehow to still, I mean, it's not as unbalanced as things were with Pope Francis, because this Pope realizes that he was losing ground against the Orthodox Church here in America. A lot of young people went to the Orthodox Church when they saw the level of wokeness that the Vatican was pushing and the Jesuits were pushing. If you push too much wokeism that goes against the very concepts of the Catholic Church, then at that point, they can't afford to lose, though, you see. So this Pope is compromising at the moment. He's trying to compromise. He's not being so political yet. I don't know for how long that is gonna last, though.
Is he still going to try to bring in one world religion like he did?
Yeah, that is even 2 days ago, second meeting in 11 days with Bartolomeo the First, the ecumenical patriarch for the Orthodox Church, the bringing back the Orthodox into the fold. The Coptic churches also are organizing for the first time a reunion. More and more, you will see the Anglican Church is completely submissive now to the Vatican. I know that for sure because my mother still lives in Rome, and she has very good connections. Even she Catholic, but she has very good connection with the local Anglican Church, and they are always there at the Vatican, the head of the Anglican Church. So, and then you have the Methodists, every single church in the world today looks at the Vatican for direction. And we have seen it really at the death of Pope Francis. It was pretty obvious. But the interpretation, you see, why they have put a pope like this one, because it's a pope that is trying to balance these two, is trying to balance things. Is kind of taking back some of the elements that Pope Francis, some of the more controversial elements, like for example, the blessing of a family outside of the traditional nucleus of man and woman is already becoming something that this Pope is kind of taking back because he wants to. He can't. I mean, why did they take this Pope as a Pope instead than maybe the Filipino Chinese guy that was very much preference for the Chinese Communist Party? Because America is still one of the major donors of the Catholic Church, and by having somebody born in America, they got who is at the same time though linked to South America and to the Jesuits, who was prepared by Pope Francis and the Jesuits for 2 years in Rome, meeting every week to prepare for his role, as it's been confirmed also by the Pope's biographer. So, I mean, it wasn't like an election. This was simply going in there. The conclave knew exactly the moment in which they went in there. The Jesuits said, "This is the candidate, you have to vote this." And in fact, that's what really brought people like Cardinal Dolan to be very surprised because he didn't expect an American to become Pope. He was shocked, you know. But the moment he entered the conclave, they immediately asked him, "Do you know Prevost? He's a great guy. He's the one that he was like, Prevost? Ah, that guy who is in Peru. Yeah, we never saw him in America, really. Ah, yeah, but we know who he is. Very nice guy. Okay." But he had to say yes because the Jesuits were like, "This is the candidate. You vote this, and that's it." Yeah. So
So is there anything that regular people can do besides pray to God? Because this is like this has been going on for thousands of years. This
yeah, sure.
and is
I,
yeah,
I think they have to continue praying, but also not rely too much on organized religion, because organized religion seems to always be weak in front of real teaching, God's teachings, and Jesus, of course, for the Christians is not an exclusivity of the Vatican, who has demonstrated that very much that their interest is on political or geopolitical control rather than in bringing you the Holy Spirit, or bringing you the message of Jesus in its original form. Let's not forget that the Jesuits control the Biblical Institute in Rome that decides what version of Jesus you are getting. If there is any discovery that goes contrary to what they have, decided in Nicaea in 325, I wrote about it. Jesuits banned those books, literally out of the Vatican archives. They eliminated them. So we couldn't have that testimony anymore.
and
And that means that we are still victims of their narrative.
I heard that they're also revising the Bible again now. Uh,
Possibly, but I mean, aside from revising, let's not forget what we might have lost in the process, because once we are talking about books and material that might have been burnt 3 or 4 centuries ago that will never ever again surface because it's simply not there anymore. And so, what are we missing? What is the missing link that completes Jesus?
yeah.
And so uh, I hope that in this end time scenario, we will have eventually, like all Christians believe, the return of Jesus, the Messiah, for the Jews or for everybody else. We will have somebody who will be able to finally unveil those truths that the Vatican is kept hidden. But remember, the biggest enemy of Jesus, just like the tale of the great inquisitor in the Brother Karamazov of Dostoevsky, is the Vatican. I mean, it's antithetic, because the moment in which a priest or a cardinal goes in front of Jesus, I mean, with all that legacy of matter and just the way he's dressed,
Mhm.
I mean, it's just like ridiculous. Jesus would, I mean, they would just face them and say, "What is this? What is this? A drag queen show?" So,
Well, yeah, the Pope, the big hat is actually I heard is Dagon, which is a fish god. I mean, there's so many things, paganism that
they
are
are
still.
all legacy of paganism. They are not the legacy of Christianity. So that is going to be eventually to discern real Christianity from all these pagan elements is going to be the job of the Messiah in the end of times. Not, I mean, having said that, Jesus is universal because he comes for everybody. So he can embrace everything, but then you will always have to say, let's not mix things that are not mixable, let's say, no, because otherwise this is Satanism. So let's see what happens. So thank you so much for having me on your show. I hope that people can check out my website, your audience, leozagami.com.
Show that. I'll show your website. I'll just do a quick screen share so people can know where to find you. And
Thank you
also
so much.
your website, your website, Leo
This,
Zagami. And check it out, you guys. You can learn more about him and also his books, Confessions of Illuminati, and also Invisible Master, The Puppeteers, Hidden Power, all on Amazon. So check out his books. And I always end with a quick prayer. So I'll just do a quick prayer and let you go. And so much mahalo for joining me. Great Spirit, infinite intelligence of all things. You are shining the light on so much right now. You're just shining the light on all darkness that is around. And we just know that angels and guides are with those people. Anybody who has had their home attacked by great fires, who has been trafficked by human trafficking, we just know that we send them a spark of hope that things can get better, and we see this world moving toward more love, more harmony, and more connection with you, Great Spirit. We know that the Christ consciousness of unconditional love surrounds all people. We surround Christ consciousness of unconditional love to Leo, and we send him so much abundance and so much security and safety that he and his family are always kept safe, Great Spirit. We know that the truth cannot be hidden, cannot be hidden. We call forth that now, and so it is. Thank you so much, Leo, for joining.
amen to that. Amen to that. And of course, I hope that your audience will be able to appreciate not only volume 12, but once they read volume 12, because it's a book they can read without reading the prior books of my Illuminati series, they might be interested in reading all the others because it gives you a complete perspective of this global infernal machine. But at the same time, it gives you the hope that maybe in the future we will be able to, once you know the truth sets you free. That was the aim of my confession series. So I hope that will be the final result. Take care. All the best. God bless you.
Aloha, bye-bye.